When playing Space Marine 2, you're going to notice that Space Marines are just built different, and quite literally built different. These 8 to 10 foot tall or 2.3 meter plus juggernauts are going around in power armor pulverizing stone and aliens just by walking through them in the 41st millennium. It's pretty clear that they can achieve superhuman feats of strength, agility, and endurance, which absolutely carries the efforts of the regular human soldiers of the Astra Militarum, Emperor bless them, towards yet another victory against the enemies of the Imperium and humanity. But who, or what exactly are the Space Marines, otherwise known as the Adeptus Astartes? If the billions of Astra Militarum servicemen can be called the hammer of the Emperor, then the Adeptus Astartes is surely called the Special Elite Scalpel of the Emperor. In this video, we'll be delving into the lore, anatomy, and insane details of what makes a Space Marine. For more Warhammer lore videos, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to leave a comment below on which Space Marine chapter is your favorite. To summarize, there are about 1,000 Space Marine chapters with their own unique beliefs and structures, give or take at any given time, within the universe of Warhammer 40k. And while the exact number of Space Marines is unknown, they are rare enough that billions upon billions of humans of the Imperium have never and probably will never see a Space Marine during their lifetime. Hence why so many of the Cadian Guardsmen in Space Marine 2 are so reverent and bow before Titus and his battle brothers, even in the midst of live combat. Many humans often regard the Space Marines as literal demigods, believing them to be blessings or angels sent by the God Emperor. These genetically engineered transhuman soldiers descend from the original Space Marine legions known as the Legions Astartes, first genetically engineered by the Emperor himself and led by 20 of his genetic offspring, the Primarchs, from whom gene seeds or genetic material that are used by the Space Marine chapters hail from. This itself is a lengthy topic which will be covered in a different video. Currently, there are two types of Space Marines within the Imperium. The Firstborn, which are essentially a sort of original or older generation of Space Marines, and the Primaris, which Titus was converted into during the events of Space Marine 2. The Primaris are Marines who are larger, stronger, and faster with more organs and newer power armor like the Mark 10. Now Titus was a firstborn Marine who underwent a surgery called the Rubicon Primaris during the events of Space Marine 2, itself a reference to crossing the Rubicon, meaning that the transformation into a Primaris Space Marine can't be undone, and we'll talk more about this procedure later in the video. For now though, let's talk about how a Space Marine is made, so brace yourself for some dark and gruesome details. Typically, Space Marine recruits are picked from tough human populations that live in harsh environments, namely some planets that have incredibly hostile climates or features making living on them a daily challenge. This can also include civilized planets or hive worlds where recruits can come from cutthroat underworld segments of society or even in some cases, high society. Other recruits are scouted from feral worlds, planets where human societies haven't even technologically progressed to the gunpowder age, which makes surviving in these worlds also challenging. Usually, the Space Marine chapters prefer volunteers, although it's not unheard of that entire groups of street urchins are sometimes captured for recruitment. Above all else, apart from toughness, the capacity for inflicting pain and being a highly aggressive psychopath are traits valued in recruits. To complicate things, recruits can't be just any age, they have to be at an age before they reach a certain level of physical maturity, usually between 9 to 12 years of age, otherwise the implants and surgical procedures have a high chance of failing. Recruitments also have to be male, as a standard gene seed therapy for transforming the aspirant into a Space Marine targets the male structure. There's a strict medical and psychological testing process before recruits are approved for organ implantation, but once the organ implantation process begins, a recruit becomes a neophyte, and at the end of the tedious and extremely unpleasant transformation, the neophyte becomes a full-fledged battle brother. Some Space Marine chapters start or end the lengthy transformation process with traditional rituals, such as the Blood Angels drinking a substance derived from their chapter's gene seed or genetic material. But the actual surgical implantation starts with putting the first 3 organs into the neophyte's body, with every organ after in order. By the way, for a lot of these organ implantations, you're not sedated, you're fully awake, so keep that in mind. The first organ implant is a secondary heart that lets a Space Marine survive even if their primary heart is destroyed or damaged. Furthermore, the secondary heart gives the added benefit of being able to survive in low oxygen environments. The second organ to be put into the body is the osmodula, a tubular organ that secretes hormones which affects the ossification of the skeleton or bone formation of the skeletal structure that can absorb ceramic-based chemicals ingested through food by an initiate. Roughly 2 years after the osmodula is implanted into the body's bones should have not only increased in durability, but also size, with even the ribcage fusing into a solid, bulletproof mass of interlocked skeletal plates. The third organ, called the biscopia, which serves as the foundation for the next phases of organ implantation, is put into the neophyte's chest cavity. The biscopia releases hormones that increase muscle growth throughout the entire body. Now, what's important to note is that even during this whole process, the recruit is supposed to still train in the ways of the Space Marine chapter and undergo various therapies, as the organs need to be exercised and activated as much as possible. For example, hypnotherapy can help recruits learn to use certain implants like the catalepsian node or oculobe organs. Mental indoctrination and training also gives a Space Marine more control over their senses and nervous system while increasing resilience to pain. Speed of thinking and reaction time also heightens, while memory training can also result in photographic memory for some Marines. Much of this mental fortitude more than likely helps with resistance, but not immunity to the pitfalls and charms of chaos corruption. The fourth organ, which starts phase 4 and 5 of the process, is a tiny implant called the hemostamen. It is inserted into the main circulatory system, which increases the hemoglobin content of the body's blood, making blood cells transporting oxygen to the various tissues even more efficient. The hemostamen also has the added effect of making a Space Marine's blood a brighter red, while serving as a monitor and controller of later implants. Along the hemostamen is the implementation of a liver-shaped organ about the size of a golf ball called the Larraman's organ. This is also placed into the chest cavity along with the biscopia so that it can generate and control what are called Larraman cells. These Larraman cells travel throughout the bloodstream if the body gets damaged and attach themselves to white blood cells that rush to wounds. Once these Larraman cells come into contact with oxygen from the wound, they form an instant patch of scar tissue, sealing the wounds. The next and sixth organ to be put into a potential Space Marine is the catalepsian node, which is planted into the back of their brain. It's a pea-sized organ which influences the body's need for sleep, which actually results in the Space Marine needing no more than 4 hours of sleep a day, or if needed, go 2 weeks without any sleep at all. The next 3 freaky organs, called the preamnor, homophagia, and multi-lung organs, are implanted into the body simultaneously, stuffing the body even more with more things. The preamnor is an organ that can neutralize poisonous or indigestible foods before they pass through the rest of the subject's digestive tract. The homophagia, also nicknamed the remembrancer, allows a Space Marine to learn by eating after being implanted into their nerves, the spinal cord connecting the brain to the stomach. What does this mean? Well, if a Space Marine comes across somebody like you, my viewer, who looks like an absolute snack, let's just say they can absorb and read your genetic material. Basically, the Space Marine can eat you and experience your memories or experiences. Interestingly, the homophagia is susceptible to mutations, which can lead to some Space Marines gaining cravings for blood and flesh later down the line. The multi-lung organ is a third lung that acts as a filter for poisoned air or even water so that Space Marines can breathe in low oxygen environments. The natural set of lungs in a Space Marine will still be active but closed off by the multi-lung if the body senses toxins in the air. The 10th organ to be implanted into a Space Marine body is called the oculobe, which sits at the base of the Marine's brain. The oculobe provides hormonal and genetic stimuli which enable the eyes to gain uncanny vision, evident in low light conditions compared to regular human eyes. The 11th organ to be transplanted into a Space Marine or onto after the oculobe is something called Lyman's ear, which are a set of normal-looking human ears that replace your natural ones. Lyman's ear makes Space Marines immune to dizziness and motion sickness. Furthermore, the Space Marine can consciously make these ears filter out or pick up certain sounds at will. The 12th organ is called a Susan membrane that's placed right above the brain so that it can eventually kind of merge and cover your entire brain. The membrane lets the Space Marine enter a state of suspended animation by their own will, which can keep them alive for years even with otherwise mortal wounds. The longest recorded period spent in suspended animation with the usage of the Tuscan membrane is held by Silas Eyre of the Dark Angels chapter, who was revived out of that state after being suspended for 567 years. The 13th organ, called the melanchromic organ, is implanted into the Space Marine's body that can let the body control the amount of melanin, so exposure to high levels of sunlight result in a darker skin to compensate for that sunlight, while also protecting the Marine from other forms of space radiation. The 14th and 15th organs can be implanted into a Space Marine at the same time, and these are the oolitic kidney and neuroglottis. The oolitic kidneys lets a Space Marine filter their blood very quickly to detoxify most poisons, much like how the multi-lung can help with poisoned air. However, if the oolitic kidney activates, it can actually render the Marine unconscious while the blood circulates at an abnormally high speed. The neuroglottis enhances a Space Marine's sense of taste, making them a human super taster times a billion, because once a Space Marine can taste your socks, I kid you not, he could probably track you by taste. The 16th organ is called the mercanoid, which is an implant that allows a Space Marine to sweat a liquid that coats their skin, which lets them become heat or cold resistant, and even space resistant in the coldness of space if they need to fight out in the void. The 17th organ is a pair of glands called Becher's gland, which is implanted into either the lower lip alongside the salivary glands of a Space Marine or into the heart palate. The glands can actually synthesize and store deadly poison, which the Space Marine are immune to, and much like venomous reptiles, a Space Marine can actually spit poison at somebody. The poison, however, is extremely corrosive to the point it can burn through various metals. The 18th organ is arguably the most important, and probably the most messed up to be added into a Space Marine's body. There are two more glands implanted into a Space Marine called the progenoids, one put into the neck and the other into the chest cavity. These glands, originally crafted by the God Emperor himself at the final stages of the transformation, are put in so that they can essentially reproduce future Space Marines by creating new gene seeds in the host's body. The glands absorb the genetic material from the almost complete Space Marine, and once the glands mature, both glands will have developed a single gene seed each, which can be harvested to make another Space Marine. And this is why in Space Marine 2, some of the joking banter you hear with Team Thalassa specify that one of them wouldn't want to see a gene seed become irretrievable if their brother dies in a bad spot as a result of being reckless, because you need these gene seeds from the dead to continue the Space Marines. Now, you might be thinking, surely there's another way for gene seeds or the genetic material to be cultivated, and there are, especially when new Space Marine chapters need to be founded, or perhaps old chapters need to be replenished for the sake of the Imperium, depending on one's perspective. For example, zygotes created from a gene seed can be grown and implanted into people who are called test slaves, who on their own were forced into it as they were biologically compatible with these zygotes. These people or test slaves are basically forced surrogates for Space Marine gene seeds, where they spend all their time in experimental capsules, fully conscious but completely immobilized. And each test slave can produce 2 progenoid glands, which means the next 2 test slaves can produce another 4 total, with the next set of slaves producing another 16 gene seeds, and so on ad infinitum. The 19th and final implant for a non-Primaris Space Marine is the Black Carapace, which may be the most painful part of the years-long procedure. The Black Carapace is like a film of black substance put directly beneath the skin layer of a Space Marine's torso in multiple sections and sheets. The Black Carapace eventually hardens on the outer layer while sending invasive neural bundles into the body. After this organ matures, neurosensors and interface points are carved into the carapace so that it lets Space Marines utilize their power armor, because without this second skin, a Space Marine wouldn't be able to use a lot of the capabilities of power armor, nor efficiently. So basically, they're putting USB slots into your body. The Black Carapace also serves as a direct interface for vehicles as well, where Space Marines can get an intuitive feel for controls and systems, making them essentially one with vehicles. Now, this all sounds exhausting, especially if you've ever had some sort of surgery in your life ever, and it's an incredibly tough ordeal for a firstborn Space Marine crew to go through it, much less survive it. However, should they want to become a Primaris Space Marine after this ordeal, they need to get 3 more organs stuffed into them, which is insane, and at a certain point in time was so risky to the point that a fully fledged Space Marine could die from the procedure referred to as the Rubicon Primaris, which fun Fun fact, one of the first to undergo this days-long process was Marneus Calgar, the current chapter master of the Ultramarines that you see in Space Marine 2. The Rubicon Primaris, as mentioned, can last for days. It's an extensive and incredibly agonizing operation conducted by entire teams of surgeons and medical servitors. To carry it out, a Space Marine has to be cut open from head to heels in various areas. Remember that bulletproof ribcage granted by the Osmodula organ from earlier in the video? Yeah, they have to somehow crack that ribcage apart, and they have to essentially suppress the healing factor of the Space Marine. So the 3 organs called the sinew coils, the Magnificat, and the Belisarian Furnace can be implemented safely. The sinew coils is a cybernetic implant that reinforces the tendons and ligaments of a Space Marine with Durasteel coil cables that can contract with incredible force while also providing some more defensive structure to the body. The Magnificat organ, otherwise known as the Amplifier, is a small thumbtack-sized loop inserted into the core of a Space Marine's brain. The Magnificat secretes even more hormones that further increases the body's growth functions while also boosting the hell out of the other implants like the Osmodula and Biscopia. And finally, the 3rd Primaris Space Marine organ implant, the Belisarian Furnace, connects the secondary and primary hearts of a Space Marine, and when the body is going through extreme trauma, it puts out self-manufactured hypersteroids and cortical stimulants that aid in the regeneration of the body. With these additional organs, the level of the genetic stability of the Primaris Space Marine is increased compared to their firstborn counterparts, making their organ implants less susceptible to mutations. The additional procedure succeeds as well in giving the Primaris Space Marines a bigger, biologically immortal body with a level of strength that lets them face off against the worst of cosmic horrors the Imperium has to constantly fight in the universe of Warhammer 40k. Now, there are of course questions you may have about the possible mental effects of this procedure, or really the psychological impact of just being a Space Marine that's constantly in combat for maybe centuries on end. But I think that's a very interesting video to save for another time. So leave a like or comment if you'd like me to cover that. Until next time, friends, stay safe and have fun.